Hi class, today we are on Saxon Math Book 4, Lesson 84, and we are going to be talking about decimal numbers to the thousandths. So that THS, remember from last year? Thousandths. Basically, it looks like we're spitting on each other as we try to say that because we stick our tongue out. We're not talking about thousands. Those are whole numbers. We're talking about thousandths, which are decimal numbers. They're parts of a whole. So today we're going to talk about how the fraction is related to the decimal. So if you take a look with me, I have a couple examples up here, starting with 7/10. You guys are used to seeing 7/10 written as a fraction. We have 7 up top in the numerator, then we have our fraction bar, and there's a 10 down below in the denominator. We can write that as a decimal just like this by putting a 7 in what is called the tenths place, which is the first place value to the right of the decimal point. After we look at these, I have a little trick that I'm going to show you, so stick with me. Here we have 12 hundredths. You're used to seeing that as a fraction. 12 in the numerator, 100 in the denominator. That is equal to this. We have a 0, a decimal point, and then a 1 in the tenths place, and a 2 in the hundredths place. We read it as 12, the 1 and the 2, that's the number 12, hundredths, because our last place value here is the hundredths value. We have the tenths and then the hundredths. So we don't break it apart. We don't say, oh, we have 1/10 and 2 hundredths. We just say we have 12 hundredths. Over here we have 125 thousandths. Once again, you're used to seeing it like this. You guys can read that, no problem. But here in the decimal form, we have 125. We read that as 125. And then my 5 right here is in the thousandths place. So we call it 125 thousandths. Okay, so here's the trick I promised you. If you're trying to read a decimal number, take your pencil, put a 1 under the decimal point. So here for my 7/10, I put a 1 under the decimal, draw a fraction bar, and then you fill in zeros for as many place values as you have after the decimal point. I only had 1 place value, so I only have 1 0, so I read this as 7/10. I'm going to do the same thing here. I put my fraction bar, I put a 1 under the decimal point, and then I fill in zeros. So here I have 12 hundredths. Excuse me for a moment. Riker, get to work. Sorry, I had to be mom. All right, 12 hundredths. You can turn these decimal numbers into fractions, and then you read it the way you're used to seeing it as a fraction. We're going to do the same trick here. Fraction bar, a 1 under the decimal, fill in zeros, and we read it as 125 thousandths. Okay, so I have another one that I want to show you. What if I just have 25 thousandths? I have to turn this into a decimal. Actually, I'm just going to show it to you as a decimal. So this one has a 0 here. We can see this because just like I showed you in my trick back there, I put a 1 under the decimal, and then I fill in zeros like that. So this is 25 thousandths. This That would not be 25 thousandths. If I use my trick, I can see that it's just 25 hundredths. So it's kind of tricky sometimes when you have a zero here. Use my little decimal to fraction trick, and that'll help you stay in the right place value every time. Okay, let's look at some of these examples together. The first one says, write 375 thousandths as a decimal number, then use words to name both numbers. So knowing this is a decimal number, we're going to start with a 0 and a decimal point. And then we have to decide, where's my 375 going to go here? So remember my trick. My 1 is right there at the decimal point, and then I have 3 zeros. Notice how I have 3 place values up there in the numerator? That means I'm just going to fill in a 375 there, and if I put my zeros underneath, I can see that this is the same as this. And then the second part of that question said, use words to name both numbers. So we read it the same way. We say 375 thousandths. When we see this, we also say 375 thousandths. So we're going to spell that out with words. 375 thousandths. And don't forget your THS to show that we're talking about a number smaller than 0 in the thousandths place, not in the thousands place. It sounds so similar, but there's a major difference in the value of those numbers. Okay, the next one says, write each decimal number as a fraction or mixed number. Then use words to name the numbers. So the first one we have looks like this. So this, you use my trick to turn it into a fraction. We put the 1 under the decimal. We fill in our zeros. So that's what it's going to look like just without the decimal point. So I want to write 625 thousandths. Just like that. Now use words. 625 thousandths. There we go. All right, the next one's a little different because this is a mixed number. So when we have a mixed number, we do the decimal into a fraction part exactly the same. So this 125, I'm gonna fill in my 1 and my zeros, and I can just write that as a fraction, 125 thousandths. However, this is not just 125 thousandths. This has that 3 in the ones place. That is a whole number. It's not a piece of a number. We've got the whole thing versus decimals over here and fractions. Those are just pieces of the whole. So my whole number, you know how to write that. We write it really big in front of the fraction. And I have not said this on purpose because I want you to think really hard about how we read this number. I'm going to take away my work there. So what I usually hear from students, and I am guilty of saying this sometimes too, is 3.125. That is wrong. And if you write that for your words, your question will be marked wrong. We read it as the whole number. We say 3 And when we get to a decimal point, we do not say point, we say and. So what we're saying here is we have 3 wholes and we have 125 thousandths. So we read it as 3 and 125 thousandths. And there you go. All right, that was the end of our examples. So the next thing I am going to have you do is the lesson practice. I want you to try that on your own. If you are in my class, make sure you keep this paper so that when we go over the answers together, you have them in front of you. If you're not in my class, have a homeschool parent check your answers and make sure that you've got them all correct and you understand this concept. When you're done, you can start your written practice, which begins on page 540 of your textbook. The lesson practice is also on page 540. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you soon.